Given that in the introductions, I will skip introductions about myself, other than saying that in addition to Huawei, I have worked in other companies in Europe and also um, worked, offered also support and expert advice to the European Commission and also to ENISA. Um, Now, I would like to spend a few seconds to explain how what kind of research we do in the German Research Center of Huawei, which is one of the biggest research centers of the company in Europe, a bigger research investment in Europe. Um, there we have organized our work in three layers. On the first layer, we have the new or emerging, if you prefer, areas of research where we want to develop, where we want to have more collaborations in the future, where we want to focus innovation in the future. And these are the Trust Smart Car, which is reasonable for Germany because of the established investment in Germany on and growth in terms of the automotive industry, and also because of the need of the German, and I would say more generally the European, but in particular the German as leading uh, automotive companies in Europe, the need to combine the excellent engineering with ICT services in order to, with excellent also ICT services and AI, in order to be able to win contesting against the likes of Tesla and so on. Future computing architecture is about how we see hardware and hardware-based security evolve in the future. And European digital sovereignty is what I'm going to talk about, which is about how digital sovereignty has been conceived and it is evolving in Europe, what kind of technologies and what kind of practices as a company we need to apply in Europe in order to make sure that there is a future for the company in Europe, and also what kind of initiatives we need to participate in, but more importantly, what kind of lessons we can learn from the digital sovereignty example in Europe, where Europe is leading at least at the moment, the way, and what kind of, and how this experience can be transferred in order to export these values and associate technologies in other regions in Asia Pacific and in North America as well. Uh, in addition to that, there is a layer about trustworthiness in Europe, which is about cooperation, ecosystem alliances, participation in standard organizations like ISO, Trust Computing Group, or in advisory organizations like ENISA or CSA and others, and of course about certification and bug bounty. And then there are in addition to these two layers, there is a third layer of core technologies. We call it fundamental technology and engineering, which is areas of technology where we have direct interaction with the company's products and where we are addressing um, uh, research challenges and innovations that have to do with the improvement of the core technologies and the survival of the company. Um, in this area, we touch a lot of technologies that relate to identity and access management, cloud and data security, and also to privacy as well. And also content protection to some extent. Now, without wasting more time before we enter the subject, let's talk about digital sovereignty and or sovereignty, and talk about first of all what it means. Um, I will give you. There are many definitions, and I would say that Google search is probably a better source of definitions than I am. But I will focus on two definitions that are very close to the purpose of this talk, and at least one or both close to my heart as well. The first one is what you would typically see when digital sovereignty is mentioned in commission documents, and it is the natural thing that you would see from a strategist and a market regulator perspective. And it is about having uh, a data framework, and data framework involves regulation, it involves technology facilitation, but also an investment, but also processes about facilitating data collection, processing, and the exchange and sharing, and infrastructure for that. The focus there in Europe is more on business to business and government to citizen, and and it very closely relates to data value, data spaces, and so on. Then you see a layer which is about the trustworthy environment within which these data frameworks operate. That is typically related to initiatives about certification, about cybersecurity coordination, about procurement conditions, GDPR, and other regulatory compliance, as well as transparency and trust facilitation and establishment within the EU. And then you see the competition and regulation aspects, which is about, on the one hand, establishing an appropriate regulatory framework for the other two layers, and on the other hand, facilitating innovation and growth, by means competitive growth in areas that are enablers for the other two layers. The other definition, which is the definition you see sometimes, it is the definition that I use in my work and in our program in the European part of Huawei. And it is also a definition that is consistent with what you see sometimes from other providers like Microsoft or Google. Give and take a few areas and then capture this. So that is the definition is about seeing digital sovereignty as an enabler for a self-sovereign digital world, or digital Europe in this case, and it looks into sovereignty from dividing it into what I would call more functional divisions. One being about identity, about self-sovereign identity, and I would like to highlight, and that would be apparent later on in the presentation as well, that when we're talking about sovereign identity, this is not necessarily SSI, this includes SSI, but it is basically the need and ability to protect user identity and put user in control of their personal information or privacy. And sovereignty in identity has multiple layers, from a personal to a corporate to the community, European or government, meaning that sovereignty needs to apply at all of these layers, and diversifications or conflicts sometimes in sovereignty need to be addressed as well. Um, by that I mean, for example, situations where one is using their corporate identity, and where they are their ability to control their corporate identity may be different to their ability to control their uh, personal identity, and that is because of the need of the company to also manage their own assets, and make sure that for example, the way that assets are used and the way that transactions are done by employees or using employee resources are compliant with European law. So you have a difference in the freedom there between the individual and between um, the corporation, the corporate use of identity. But in both cases, these relate to rules that have to do with the sovereignty of the corresponding actors. Um, Now, data and information sovereignty is more about transparency and control over the protection, residence, and use of data. Software workload sovereignty is about applications and workloads across platforms, interoperability, and ability to be independent of the provider software. And operational sovereignty is about visibility and control over the provider operations, and about the ability of somebody to be able to check, control, keep transparency, and potentially intervene. on how the data in other digital assets are used in when hosted or when incorporated in the operations of other providers. Uh, so, why it is important to what is the problem here that I would like to talk about in relation to this uncertainty? The the main problem is about enabling that I would like to tackle at least in this talk, and it's also where I would like to engage with others to facilitate joint innovation is about the creation of both technologies but also socio-technical frameworks that facilitate the creation of both sovereign data infrastructures, but also but also transactions and usage of data and possibly of usage of data by smart service and AI as well on top of these infrastructures in space. So starting from the bottom to top, how assets, digital assets, and data, including identities, can be managed by in a shared responsibility model by individuals, by corporations, by collectives or federations, if you prefer, and by the union as a whole and how this can enable data-centered innovation. Um, Associated initiatives with that in the are, of course, the ESIF and similar initiatives on the identity space. More importantly, the GAIA-X in infrastructure on the data space, on the data infrastructure space, in the data spaces initiatives, including, for example, IDSA and iShare in the data space, as well as domain-specific data spaces like Athena-X in Germany or in Europe. What all of these are trying to do is to facilitate the sharing of data and other resources in a way that it can be uh, controlled, compliant with privacy regulation and other data security or information security regulation, and visible in terms of what people can do. Very often, this is also associated with open source implementations, but it is not necessary that implementations are open source. What is necessary is that implementations are trustworthy, so open source helps a lot, but also that they offer visibility and control to the owner of the corresponding asset and ability to that owner of both control their assets, but potentially take the asset from one provider to another, or take their investment from one provider to another, and also have control of their assets, or not only during the use by themselves, but also when they are offered to others. So, for example, have the ability to control and see or intervene on how one's data, for example, are used after they're given to an organization, or at least have the ability to inspect that any conditions that were put under the consent clauses or that they have been agreed have been properly fulfilled. So why I think that Europe is a particularly interesting place for doing research in digital sovereignty. Uh, Europe is unique in many ways, okay? And that does not come for me only as a European, but as a European who has been born in the south of Europe, has lived most of his life now in an island in the west of Europe, in the UK, and now works in Germany and effectively. He have done that kind of round and but also operates as a resident and or citizen of three different countries, and needs to comply with um, similar or divergent identity systems, but also similar or divergent regulatory frameworks in the different places. So Europe, it is important because it is a union. It is a union of sovereign member states, and it is also a union that operates externally as a union of these sovereign member states. So when we're talking about sovereignty in Europe, sovereignty takes two layers. Well, three layers: the citizen, the member state, and the union. In addition, of course, to the operations in the context of corporations and so on. Um, Europe is also different in terms of regulation because of different values. So, for example, you can see that there is a forthcoming regulation about use of AI in Europe that restricts the use of AI and may also even limit export of AI use of AI models or data that can be used to create AI models by governments that are using AI for social scoring. Or also, you see that historically, European EU member states are happy with having digital, well, with having government issued identities, whereas Anglo-Saxon countries, including the UK and the US and so on, they do not have identities that are issued by member states. So there are fundamental differences there. Um, Now, I would like to quickly move on a little bit in the interest of time to the fact that regulation and the way that it comes in Europe now uh, facilitates data flow between member states and between companies that are operating in Europe, but at the same time is putting there enough constraints to protect both the privileges of the individuals and also the value of assets, in particular data assets, but also other digital assets. That kind of framework and the way that it has been introduced has had an impact that is quite significant in that it is now driving technological innovation because the technologies that very often we had in place, they were not fully up to uh, supporting the vision of, of the regulation. It is one of the very few moments, I would say, in recent history where it has not been the technology that has been driving it, but it has been a combination of the technology and regulation to adjust society to the technology that has been driving the innovation. Um, so what I would like to focus then is on innovations that need to be put in place in order to facilitate data sharing and use in accordance to the principles of digital sovereignty in accordance to European regulation. And there I would like to highlight effectively three different layers. Um, one that has to do with infrastructure, one that has to do with the data space enablement technology, where we see initiatives such as GaiaX and so on emerging in Europe, and then the data spaces and the smart service on data spaces on top. Um, so within in that context, I would spend a little bit of time to capture or to elaborate some of the research challenges that I think that are of value for as contributions to initiatives such as GaiaX, where Huawei is also participating and where we are actively working on. So essentially, I will give you some insights or some foresight of what we're researching in that direction, but also cover aspects as relate to decentralized identity and its and the use of those infrastructures for the creation of data spaces. Starting now, given that I mentioned data spaces from top to down, um, I would like to first touch upon what we mean by data space and refer to that in two initiatives. One initiative that I find particularly interesting. One initiative is the International Data Spaces that started in Germany and then expanded internationally, um, which is facilitating many different aspects of data sharing within a digital space. It has put forward a reference architecture, uh, and in this reference architecture, there are two fundamentally important, prominent, if you prefer, in my view, architectural concepts. One is that of a data space connector, that it is enabling effectively data exchange and usage and enforcement of data space rules. And another is that of usage control or data usage or data-centric usage control, which is more about controlling that certain agreements about data sharing, about privacy, and about data use are in place and influence use of data before access is granted to the data during the use of the data, and also if uh, use is completed or when use is revoked in particular. Uh, Another similar complementary, I would say similar, partly overlapping initiative, complementary in some aspects, has been iShare, which was mainly came out of the in the Netherlands of the logistics sector, and where the focus was more on trust and security there, but there the some interesting concepts, in particular concepts around establishing a compliance framework where certain policies or schemes are provided by the data space enabler, and these schemes are enforced with ability to check the compliance of enforcement by the participants. Um, the an interesting aspect there is, in my view, is the use of delegation policies, as they call them. I would call them more recognition of authority policies, which enable effectively a scheme owner or a facilitator to set a set of rules and have this set of rules influence the way that resources are access to the way that participants and other members are defining policies. Okay? Um, those types of data space infrastructures in the way that things are going in the future would be running on top of an enabler, a data infrastructure enabler that and initiatives for that kind of enablement in Europe, they have taken the form of now Gaia X. I think that this is the most prominent one, although others may appear also in the future. Um, Now, these are closely linked to also decentralized identities, but I will capture that kind of link later on. For the moment, the important thing to mention about that layer is that it is about bringing service together, internet service together, and cloud service together, especially data cloud service together, and about creating that infrastructure on top of that federated ecosystem that would enable the creation of data spaces upon which other smart services will operate. In order to put these things together, uh, four fundamental anchors that need to be in place are the technologies about, first of all, identity and trust, in order to be able to establish federations at multiple different layers, in order to be able to join the infrastructure ecosystem, be assured that you have enough capabilities in place so that you can facilitate compliant usage of data, or that you can automate the collection of evidence to prove the data has been used with preservation of the appropriate privacy rules, and also give back some control of this to the data owner. So identification and trust for these aspects, including identity management and trust management, and also federation creation is fundamental. Then another element that supports this is the federated catalogs. One could call them verifiable data registries, so but let's call them federated catalogs. They are effectively allowing entities to describe what they are offering, describe their assets, their services, and their service offerings, but do that in a way that it's verifiable, that it links with the identities that were mentioned before, and that has a level of assurance with respect to compliance, both compliance for entering the infrastructure, but also compliance for participating in the corresponding data space. So compliance check is quite important, both during the onboarding on an infrastructure, but also during the creation of different federations that have data space. And the sovereign data exchange is something that is more advanced, if you prefer, in terms of the fine granularity of what needs to be done, and lives in that kind of environments, expects identification, expects ability to have verifiable descriptions of assets, including data, and expects the ability to check compliance, and enforces policies about how data is used, how data is exchanged, um, and how certain principles such as consent or interoperability or transparency have been enforced. Enforcement or proof, if you prefer, of enforcement can be either proactive, automated with the appropriate infrastructure, or it can be retrospective, because very often it is not possible to automate certain aspects. Retrospective would mean that appropriate evidence has been collected in order to be able to prove that everything has happened in accordance to agreements. I have mentioned here also some examples of other companies in addition to Huawei, such as Google and Microsoft and Amazon, who have also joined IX, and in order to highlight how global the initiative is. Now, I will start getting now more into the research challenges, where I would like also to have more interaction in this session, and start first from the identity and trust, then go to the sovereign data exchange, and then cover the other two aspects. Now, in terms of the identity and trust, in my view, the biggest challenge is or the biggest challenges are, on the one hand, to have a holistic IAM system that is able to facilitate and cope, on the one hand, with the decentralization of identities that happens within the data ecosystem, and they are, on the other hand, facilitate that participants, that companies who want to join these data spaces are able to do that without having to recreate or reinvent or rebuild an identity anew yet another identity system. So how to be able to create federations and how to be able to build um, trust on top of, on the one hand, a decentralized environment, so decentralized identity-based environment, or an environment based on decentralized identities, and how, on the other hand, you can plug in legacy or more traditional corporate federated identity systems like the ones that we use in big corporations with SAML or IDC or those that SMEs are using when they leverage, I do not know, Azure or Google Clouds and so on in order to have external identity providers. So how do you bring your own identity into that environment, and how can this environment help you to work as normal on the one hand in your corporate environment and leverage decentralized trust and decentralized identities on the other hand within the data ecosystem and keep track of what how your credentials are used while at the same time facilitating privacy. How do you do that? And for that, where we are focusing at the moment, and by who we, I mean the German research center in Huawei, my team there, is in finding a way to bridge federated and decentralized identity approach. And that is particularly challenging because there are diverse trust models and also the processes, both in terms of the recognition of the identity of the federation and for the life cycle of the identity are different. So what we want to be able to do is to create a middle layer that allows us to bring in identities into a decentralized identity environment and be able to bridge between the legacy environments and the decentralized environment uh, in a way that it is policy controlled, that it is sovereign, and when we can have explicit recognition of authority, but also a mapping, a dynamic mapping between the credentials. And by dynamic mapping, I don't mean just exchanging tokens. So I have a JW3 hub token or I have a necessary identity when I want to exchange it to an OIDC or to an auth2 token, things like that. I mean that we, in addition to doing things like that, you also are able to reflect uh, the semantics of the protocols. You're also able to maintain the lifetime of the privileges and of the credentials. You're able to elevate or degrade credentials, and you're able to manage revocations and so on. So capture the dynamicity, the semantic mappings in the protocols, and the automation of bring your own identity. Um, for that, we're looking into how we can bring together policy-based control on the identity and credentials issuance and lifecycle management. How we can have policies that automate based on an understanding of the context, the exchange of credentials from one format to another, and how do we implement workflows that fill the gaps between the semantic mappings of different identity, federated identity protocols and decentralized identity schemes. So that you can see it more about both sorting out the mathematics and the semantics of claims issuance and claims validation, as well as the policy-based automation on how we can semantically correlate different federated identity and decentralized identity protocols. A second challenge, and I would like to have a short break for questions and discussions after this second challenge, has to do with how we cope with the data exchange, with secure data usage or sovereign data usage and exchange. I think that this is probably the biggest challenge or the holy grail, if you prefer, in data spaces and data and cloud data infrastructure. Um, and this is where we are looking into ways of expanding access and usage control protocols into a framework where we can actually monitor what kind of authorizations have been given, how data are used at the particular point, and possibly either facilitate improvement of compliance or revoke authorization if a an appropriate level of compliance has not been maintained. We're looking in particular in ways of uh, expanding access control into a framework that has continuous monitoring and state. We're looking into capturing in that state the different phases of not only authorization lifecycle, but also the different phases of data lifecycle and data flow, and then addressing two subparts on this. One being how you can enforce how you can enforce policies into that environment where you take into account the state of the transaction, and secondly, how you can collect evidence about these authorizations so that without expanding outside of your scope, of the scope of the use, and without violating the confidentiality of any other transaction, you can provide evidence that is showing that the data used or exchanged has been compliant to the sovereignty policy. Okay? So checking both proactively and retrospectively the enforcement, but also being able to introduce uh, data life cycle and data transaction state into access control in order to go beyond effectively usage control, in order to reach usage control and go beyond in terms of granularity, is where we see the biggest innovation happening in that area, or one of the two biggest innovations happening in that area. The second one, this is one that I have been talking about and I have been focusing in. The second one is the sensitive data discovery. Is how do you make sure that you understand, ideally automatically, what is important to protect, what is important to monitor, and that you do that in a way that facilitates transparency and intervenability. Um, the into in this scope, in the scope of the use control that I was mentioning before, we have been collaborating with researchers in European institutes, both in Italy and in Germany, and we have been developing from scratch a new technology that we hope in the near future to be able to offer to GX into data spaces. Um, where we improve on the one hand the efficiency of the transactions. So being able to make decisions, policy-based decisions very quickly in microseconds, in tens of microseconds, using policies that are rich and but in formats that are not very heavy. And that's one part, but the other part has to do with introducing state and managing the states associated with the session in this case being the service usage or the service offering session, the transaction session, if you prefer. And moving from state to state, not only of the traditional authorization, which is more the focus of more traditional usage control, as to what happens before during and after an authorization, but also moving across all the stages of the data lifecycle and the data and the flow of the data exchange. So basically, what you need to, what kind of rules you need to apply when you are preparing to offer access to the data, what rules you need to apply when data is valid and in use, what you need to apply in if data flows in a particular way in a given use case. For example, what rules you need to apply if data is used in an analytics use case, how do you and so on. Another aspect complementary to that is how do you introduce consent and recognition of authority. Why I put these things together? Because technically they are kind of similar. Why do I say that? I say that because in both cases, what we use in order to capture this are some kind of additional policies that are the rules, if you prefer, that are the that correspond to assertions about the admissibility of other policies, of other rules. So when you consent to something, you say that I want my data to be used, for example, only for the analytic purposes, only for the purpose of analytics. I want this data to be used only for the purpose of analytics, and I don't want my age to be used at all. So what does this mean? This means that you allow effectively somebody to write whatever policies they want about protecting your data or about using your data, as long as they comply with that kind of constraint that you have already put about the future usage of services. And if they are within that scope, then you are happy to accept them. But if they're outside of that scope, they should not be applied. They should not be there. The scope that you define is what should be prevailing. That is a dual concept of the, I would say, very close, very close and dual concept to the recognition of authority from the point of view of some administrator of writing policies about what other administrators can issue. So that kind of concept, on the one hand, can be used about capturing advanced cases of consent. On the other hand, can be used about recognizing what kind of giving somebody, recognizing the authority of somebody to issue assertions, for example, or credentials about some particular data space or about some particular task. For that, we are using for these dual concepts. We're using a similar technology to what in the past has been referred to as administrative delegation, and it is effectively something that adds to policy rule evaluation a complementary layer, which is a layer of admissibility. So you are not looking only whether policies are applicable to a particular case and you evaluate them, but also you look into whether policies are admissible with respect to whether they come from a recognized authority or whether they comply to some consent agreement and so on.
Theo?
At this point, I would like to stop for questions here.
I was asking about this, so because you said you want to make a short Q&A, because we have just 12 minutes left in this.
Yes, I would like to. I think that is a good time now to stop for a short Q&A, and then depending on what time is left, I will seek whether I cover some other less important topics or jump to conclusions.
Yeah. Okay. So I sent in the chat. I'm not sure if people read the chat, that they can write questions if they want, but they can also raise their hand, or they can now turn on their microphone and also ask directly any questions if any?
Okay.
So I think I I think in the chat there's nothing at the moment. So maybe everyone is keeping questions until the very end.
If there are no questions, I can continue, and then we can reconvene for questions afterwards.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe just
right.
for 5 minutes, because
Yeah.
otherwise we will
Sure.
have no questions.
Sure. Another element that I wanted to capsule has to do more with um, the fact that in order to be able to achieve the necessary automation for facilitating the enforcement of sovereign policies, especially when we're talking about automated transactions, we need to make sure that descriptions of different services, descriptions also of data elements and of other resources, so service offering resources and so on, that are not only machine readable and interoperable, but they can also, but also they have claims or assertions, if you prefer, about what is being offered, or about the classification of data, or about other aspects that relate to a service offering that can be verified. And there has been some excellent work in W3C about verifiable credentials that are offering a data model and some solutions in that direction. But putting this together and applying that concepts such as this um, in a way that service descriptions, data classification, and resource descriptions and so on can work in practice and in the scale and in a decentralized way is a particular challenge. And it is a challenge that in my view is making is enabling a leap in terms of technologies about legitimacy and so on. Very often, people are talking about the registries. They are thinking of technological leaps in terms of whether somebody uses a distributed ledger or a decentralized registry, or a federated registry, or the other similar things. Uh, in my view, the leap in terms of for both innovation technology is not that much on how the registry is structured and how decentralized it is. Of course, it helps. Decentralization and scale helps. It helps a lot. But the essence is in the description, what is inside the registry, in whether you can read the descriptions of data, whether you can understand it, process it mechanically, and be able to verify. So the combination of concepts about credentials and verification of credentials with data descriptions and data linking is something that can hopefully offer a solution there and enable us to make that leap. And this is not a new innovation, but I would say it is the result of many years of repeated um, uh, spiral improvements on innovation in the sense of linked data, RDF, and so on, semantic web, and so on, and and now JSON linked data, and in terms of credentials and verification, starting from a variety of different assessment formats to mathematical proofs to things that can be more easily and accurately verified nowadays. And the last aspect to cover there has to do more with um, uh, the onboarding and accreditation and compliance aspect. And then I would say that there is a lot that needs to be done, both at the community level, at the regulatory level, and also at the technology level. Talking about the technology level, which is perhaps something that at least us as researchers uh, may find it easier to influence. We need to be able to capture properly um, policy rules, to be able to capture these rules into credentials that can be verified, be able also to process these rules as rules that relate either to compliance and associate and be able to associate them with a collection of evidence. So you have monitors that are able to monitor against these rules, or also capture them as rules, as I was mentioning before, that relate to recognition of authority, so that we are able to understand who is able to issue other rules or other information about what. That kind of thing is essential in order to achieve decentralization at scale. If we do not want, or if we cannot have centralized authorities facilitating the establishment of trust and facilitating compliant operations, and if we want to do things in a sovereign and decentralized way, we need to be able to cope and work with entities that simply set rules and pass these rules to others to enforce, but pass them with strings attached and with the ability to inspect what has happened during or after the enforcement, so that they can have assurance about things happening properly. And that is fundamental because often it goes with decentralization, goes with improved self-control, but that comes together with commitments about compliance, and that comes together with sharing effectively of evidence about compliant behavior. Um, Now I would leave as some people unfortunately say I would leave the bulk of the meat to the readers of the slides afterwards, because I think that we're running out of time. But for your own interest, I have included some more details about the four layers, the four anchors that I was mentioning about, as well as some labels, buzzwords, if you prefer, or labels about particular topics that we plan here are already looking into or plan to look into. The important thing is that please have a look at those. If you are working on any of these topics, or you are interested in working on any of these topics, or you believe that you have a great idea in some of these topics, who would like to talk to you, would like to work with you, who would like to make sure that we innovate together. I want to emphasize that in this area that where the presentation touches the digital sovereignty, we have a commitment on open innovation and on sharing results and on working collaboratively with people towards either joint demonstrators and or open source development of capability. So it is an area where I would like to, where we are committed to facilitate joint innovation and collaboration, and where I would like to see more collaboration happening in the near future. And these are my conclusion and takeaway points, even if um, you did not, hopefully you will find this as my conclusion and takeaway points, and you will find a lot of topics here that you're interested in and come back to follow up on this. But if you did not care about the technology or the detail that I have presented before, but you're still interested in the general topic, these are the takeaway points. So even if I was not mentioning anything about technology throughout of the presentation, what to keep in mind is that it is that the digital sovereignty is about policy making, and on that, Europe is leading at the moment. It is about competitiveness and becoming independent of competitive pressures from both the East and the West for Europe, in the case of Europe. But it is also about socio-technical innovation. It is about investing in technologies that are able to meet aspirations of society and regulation that we're not able to achieve in the future, in the past, and we will not be able to achieve in the future unless there is this socio-technical innovation. And the innovation is socio-technical, it's not only technological. And it is also about leadership and growth. Very often, digital sovereignty is perceived as somebody trying to enforce regulation and trying to protect things. It is not necessarily about protecting. It is also about sharing, but also it is about exporting values and exporting expertise. And that, together with future growth, can change the state of play and bring somebody from being a rule maker into somebody being a growth leader. And I think that in Europe actually has that opportunity. The question is whether we will take it.
Okay. Thank you, Theo. So there was one question in the chat from, I think if the answer is brief, we may have the time to answer it.
The question is, how would you rate the overall concept of Gaia X?
I think that it is, I think that I will try to give a very short answer in terms of the intention and the necessity. The intention is good, and the necessity of having a data infrastructure in order to support data sovereignty in Europe, that's quite important. In terms of delivery, this is early days. I've been involved in many international initiatives from early days. Some of them succeeded, others not. The early days are always difficult and very confusing, sometimes very political. But I see a critical mass, and I see necessity. So if there is a critical mass and there is a necessity, something will happen, and usually something impactful will happen. Whether this is Gaia X or something different, time will tell us. But we need something like that. Whether this is Gaia X, I do not know. Too early to say.
Thank you. So I think, Ronald and Theo, I think the session is ending pretty much on time. We're 2 minutes above, but I think that is on time in my world. Hoping everybody else's as well. Thank you very much, Theo, for your most interesting lecture. And people will be able to contact you, I think, afterwards through the platform, and will be able
there
to
is
ask questions.
Yeah, very very happy to follow up, including on questions about complex.
Excellent. So again, thank you very much for being here today and for sponsoring ESORICS. For everybody else, there's now a break until 6:15. Then there will be 4 more paper sessions on crypto, malware, blockchain, and automotive. And then at 7:30 p.m. Central European Summertime, there will be Shafi Goldwasser's keynote on the algorithm and the law. And then finally, towards the evening at 8:30, there will be the opportunity to either do cyber range or networking, whatever you prefer. Theo and Ronald, once again, our thanks goes to you. And
thanks for having us.
Look forward to seeing everybody.